The Mafia boss kicked the black maid out. Her defiance shook the entire mansion. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jasmine Williams had been working for Victor Romano, the infamous Mafia boss, for over 2 years. From the moment she stepped foot into his mansion, she knew this would be no ordinary job. The mansion was a palace of power, decadence, and control. Every hallway echoed with the weight of wealth, and every room whispered secrets of a life built on intimidation and ruthless ambition. But for Jasmine, it was just a job, a way to get by. She had never imagined that her life would collide with the heart of the Mafia. Jasmine was used to being overlooked. She was a black maid, a servant in a world of the elite, and she had learned long ago how to remain invisible, to do her work quietly, and to avoid drawing attention. But today, something had changed. Jasmine had been working in the grand dining hall, dusting the massive chandelier, when she overheard a conversation between Victor and one of his associates. The conversation was nothing new. Victor was always making deals, always plotting something, but what she heard this time sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't the details of the deal that bothered her, but the implications. There was talk of a dangerous plan, one that could have disastrous consequences for a lot of innocent people. As Jasmine quietly retreated from the doorway, trying not to be seen, she felt a sense of unease she had never experienced before. She wasn't sure what to do with the information she had overheard, but one thing was clear: her life was about to change. Victor entered the dining hall just as she was finishing her task. He looked at her, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Jasmine," he said in his usual cold tone, "get out of here. I need to speak with someone." Jasmine's heart raced, but she nodded quickly and moved toward the door, trying to hide her anxiety. But before she could make it out of the room, Victor's voice stopped her. "You're fired." Jasmine froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned slowly, confused. "Fired?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For what?" Victor stepped closer, his face a mask of indifference. "You're a liability. I don't need someone like you around." Jasmine's mind raced. She had worked tirelessly for him, always quiet, always respectful, and now she was being dismissed with no explanation. But something inside her stirred. She had heard what she needed to hear. She knew the truth, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't going to back down. "No," Jasmine said firmly, surprising herself. "I'm not leaving." The words hung in the air, charged with defiance. For a moment, there was silence. Victor's eyes flashed with something. Anger, perhaps, but also something else. A flicker of doubt. "You're not in a position to refuse," he said coldly. Jasmine stood tall, her back straight. "I know what you're planning," she said, her voice steady. "And I won't let you get away with it." Victor's expression darkened, but Jasmine didn't flinch. The power dynamics had shifted. For once, she wasn't the one cowering. She wasn't the one in the wrong. She was standing up for what was right. And in that moment, Jasmine knew that her defiance had already shaken the very foundation of Victor Romano's world. Jasmine stood there, her heart racing as she faced Victor Romano, the Mafia boss who had just fired her. His words hung in the air like a weight, but she refused to let fear take hold of her. For the first time, she didn't feel small in front of him. For the first time, she felt like she was the one holding the power. Victor stared at her, his sharp eyes calculating, trying to gauge if she was serious. For a brief moment, he said nothing. The silence between them was thick, filled with tension. Jasmine knew that she had crossed a line, but she also knew that the truth she held was too important to ignore. She had overheard enough to know that Victor was involved in something far worse than she could ever imagine. And as much as she had tried to stay out of his business, this time, it was personal. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Victor said finally, his voice cold. He turned away, his back to her as he moved toward his desk. "You're a maid. You clean my house, nothing more. I don't have time for your foolishness." Jasmine's resolve only grew stronger. She couldn't back down now. "I know exactly what you're doing," she said, her voice steady. "And I won't let you destroy people for your gain." Victor paused, his hand resting on the edge of his desk. He turned back to her, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone sharp. Jasmine stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I overheard your conversation," she said. "I know what you're planning, and I won't let it happen." Victor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise in his expression before it was quickly masked by his usual arrogance. He walked toward her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "You think you can stop me?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Jasmine didn't flinch. "I don't know if I can stop you," she replied, "but I can expose you." She could see the wheels turning in Victor's head, his mind processing her words. He had no idea how much she knew, how close she was to unraveling the plans he had worked so hard to hide. For a moment, Victor said nothing. His gaze hardened as he studied her. "You're bold, I'll give you that," he said quietly. "But you're also naive. You don't belong in this world. You think you can just waltz in and start making threats? You're out of your league." Jasmine stood tall, her posture unwavering. "I may not be part of your world," she said, "but I'm not afraid of it. I've seen what you're capable of, and I won't sit by while you destroy innocent lives." Victor laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the room. "Innocent lives?" he scoffed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This is the real world, sweetheart. People get hurt, people get used. That's how things work." Jasmine felt a fire ignite within her. She had heard those words before, from people who used power to hurt others, who believed they were untouchable. But Victor was wrong. She was not going to let him get away with it. "You think you're untouchable," she said, her voice rising, with confidence. "But you're not. Not anymore." The words hung in the air between them, charged with an energy that neither of them could deny. For the first time, Jasmine felt in control. Victor's smile faded, replaced by a look of irritation. "You're done here," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Leave now." Jasmine didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Not until you know the truth." Victor's expression shifted, the first hint of uncertainty flashing in his eyes. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as she took a deep breath, knowing this was her moment. "You think you're in charge," she continued, "but you're not. You're just hiding behind your money and your power. The truth will come out, and when it does, no amount of wealth or influence will save you." The silence between them stretched for a moment before Victor finally spoke again. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. Jasmine's gaze never wavered. "No," she said. "The mistake was ever thinking you could get away with it." For a moment, Victor seemed to consider her words. Then, with a cold smile, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the grand hall. But Jasmine stood firm, knowing that this was just the beginning. She wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. Victor Romano paced back and forth in his office, his mind racing with the events of the past few hours. Jasmine's words echoed in his head, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of doubt. How could a mere maid, someone so far beneath him, dare to challenge him like that? His usual sense of control, the power he held over everyone in this mansion, had been shaken. The calm confidence he had built his life on was now fractured. His jaw tightened as he stopped in front of his desk, staring down at the papers scattered across it. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," he snapped, his voice low and controlled, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. His right-hand man, Frank, entered the room, closing the door quietly behind him. "Boss," Frank said, his voice cautious. "There's something you need to know." Victor didn't look up as he gestured for Frank to continue. Frank hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "It's about Jasmine," he said. "She's been talking to people. Words spreading about what happened." Victor's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, talking to people?" he demanded. "She's just a maid. No one cares about her." Frank shifted uncomfortably, but continued. "It's not just that. I've been hearing rumors. People think she knows something about you." Victor stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "What are you saying?" he growled, his patience wearing thin. Frank paused for a moment before speaking carefully. "I think she knows about the deal with the Johnson family, the one we've been keeping under wraps." Victor's heart skipped a beat. The Johnson deal was one of the most important agreements he had ever made, and it was built on lies, secrecy, and manipulation. If Jasmine knew anything about it, It could destroy everything. Are you sure? Victor asked, his voice now tinged with urgency. Frank nodded, though his expression was tense. I'm not sure what exactly she knows, but she's been asking questions. People are starting to talk. She might have overheard something she shouldn't have. Victor clenched his fists, his mind racing. He couldn't afford for this to get out. Jasmine had to be stopped, but she wasn't just any maid. She had something powerful on him, something he didn't fully understand yet. He couldn't let her get away with this. Get her out of here, Victor ordered, his voice cold. I want her gone, and I want her to know she's not welcome. Do whatever it takes. Frank nodded and turned to leave, but Victor's voice stopped him. Wait, Victor said, his mind working quickly. I don't want to make this too easy for her. She's made a mistake, but she needs to learn that you don't challenge me and get away with it. Frank raised an eyebrow, unsure of what Victor meant. What do you want me to do? Victor's lips curled into a tight smile. Make sure she knows who she's dealing with. And remind her that no one crosses me. Frank hesitated, but then nodded. Understood, boss. As Frank left the room, Victor felt a surge of anger rise within him. He had worked too hard to build his empire, and he wasn't about to let a lowly maid bring it all crashing down. But something in the back of his mind kept nagging at him. Jasmine had stood her ground, unafraid, and that had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He couldn't let her think she had any power. Not in his world. Jasmine, meanwhile, was back in the staff quarters, sitting on the edge of the small bed she had claimed as her own. She had not expected her confrontation with Victor to go this far. She had merely wanted to expose the truth, to make sure he didn't get away with his plans. But now, as she sat alone in the quiet of her room, she realized how much danger she was in. Her heart raced as she thought of the conversation she had overheard. She had never meant for it to go this far. All she had wanted was to stand up for what was right. She had seen enough to know that Victor was involved in something far darker than she could ever have imagined. But now, it was too late to back down. Jasmine stood up, pacing the small room. She couldn't let Victor get away with it. She had to find a way to protect herself. But first, she needed more information. She needed to find out everything she could about the deal with the Johnson family and whatever else Victor had been hiding. It wasn't going to be easy, and she knew she was taking a huge risk. But in that moment, Jasmine felt a fire inside her. She wasn't going to let him win. She wasn't going to let him destroy everything for his own gain. Jasmine had spent her whole life being quiet, being invisible, but not anymore. She was going to fight back. She was going to take control of her own destiny. The sound of footsteps approaching her door made her stop in her tracks. She held her breath, listening intently. The footsteps stopped outside her door, and there was a brief pause. Then, the door swung open. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she turned to face whoever had entered, knowing that this could be the moment that would change everything. The door creaked open slowly, and Jasmine's heart raced. Standing in the doorway was Frank, one of Victor's most trusted men. His eyes were cold, his expression unreadable, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her stomach twist. Jasmine took a step back, instinctively placing herself near the corner of the room. Frank stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, as he stood in the center of the room, sizing her up. Victor wants to see you, Frank said, his voice low and calm. But there was a hint of something darker in his tone. Jasmine's mind raced. She knew this was not a simple summons. Frank wasn't here to deliver a message or to have a casual chat. The last time Victor had called for her, it was to fire her, to dismiss her like she was nothing. But now, after what she had said to him, what she had uncovered, the stakes were higher. She had no idea what Victor wanted, but she knew it couldn't be good. I'm not going anywhere, Jasmine replied, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She wasn't about to let Victor intimidate her into submission. Frank's lips twisted into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. You don't have a choice, he said, his voice carrying an unmistakable edge. Victor's not someone you defy. You've seen what he's capable of, and trust me, you don't want to push him any further. Jasmine's throat tightened, but she stood her ground. She had already gone too far to turn back. The truth was out, and there was no going back to her quiet life of cleaning the mansion's floors. If she didn't stand up for what she knew, for the people she cared about, everything she had done would have been for nothing. I won't be intimidated, Jasmine said, her voice rising slightly. If Victor wants to talk, he can come to me. Frank's smile faded, and he took a step closer. You don't understand, do you? He said, his voice a little harsher now. Victor doesn't do things the way you think. He has ways of making people disappear, of making them regret ever crossing him. You think you're some hero standing up for the little guy, but you're just a maid in a mansion full of monsters. Jasmine's fists clenched at her sides. She could feel the anger building inside her, but she refused to let Frank see it. She had to. Stay calm, stay focused. If she let her emotions take over now, she would lose. If you think I'm afraid of Victor, Jasmine said, her voice now a mixture of defiance and determination, then you don't know me at all. I'm not backing down. Frank studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing, as if he were trying to figure out if she was bluffing. But Jasmine held his gaze, not flinching, not giving him an inch. Finally, Frank let out a soft sigh, his posture relaxing slightly. Fine, he said, his tone still cold but tinged with a hint of amusement. You'll come with me, then. But don't think for a second that this is over. Victor doesn't forget things like this. You've made a mistake, and he'll make sure you know it. Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. Frank turned and walked toward the door, glancing over his shoulder to make sure she was following. Jasmine hesitated for only a moment before she squared her shoulders and walked behind him. She had no idea what Victor was going to do, but she wasn't going to let him break her. Not now. Not ever. As she followed Frank through the mansion's long, empty hallways, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The luxury of the mansion, the opulence of the decor, the grand staircase. It all felt so hollow now, so empty. She had spent years cleaning these rooms, working silently behind the scenes, never questioning the power that filled these walls. But now, she was at the center of it all, standing face to face with the very power she had once only observed. Frank led her into a large, dimly lit office at the end of the hall. The walls were lined with dark wood, and a massive desk sat in the center of the room. Behind the desk, Victor Romano sat, his hands clasped together in front of him, his cold eyes fixed on Jasmine as she entered. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension palpable. Jasmine stood tall, refusing to show any fear, even as her heart hammered in her chest. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her with a cold, calculating gaze. You've been a problem, Jasmine, he said, his voice low and steady. You've made a lot of noise for someone who is supposed to be nothing more than a maid. You think you can just walk in here and expose my business? Jasmine's throat tightened, but she didn't back down. You've been hiding behind lies, Victor. You're hurting people, and I won't stay silent anymore. Victor's lips curled into a small, humorless smile. You think you're some kind of hero? Some crusader for justice? He asked, his voice mocking. You're nothing but a tool. A pawn in a game much bigger than you. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, but she kept her voice steady. Maybe, she said. But even a pawn can take down a king. Victor's smile faded, and for a moment, his eyes flashed with something that almost looked like respect. Then, in an instant, it was gone, replaced by the cold, ruthless gaze she had come to expect from him. You're playing a dangerous game, Victor said, his tone low and threatening. But if you think you can stand against me, you'll learn just how wrong you are. Jasmine stood her ground, not a flicker of fear in her eyes. She knew what was coming, but she was ready. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let him win. Victor's eyes locked onto Jasmine as she stood firm, not flinching under his gaze. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if time had slowed, each second stretching out into eternity. The weight of what was at stake hung heavy in the air. Jasmine had exposed a truth that Victor had worked tirelessly to bury, and now, standing before him, she could feel the magnitude of the battle she was about to face. You think you're smarter than me, don't you? Victor's voice broke the silence, his tone icy but controlled. You've made your little threat, played your hand, but you don't understand the game you're in. I built this empire with blood, sweat, and tears. You're nothing but a small piece in the grand scheme of things. And you're about to find out just how small you really are. Jasmine's heart raced, but she kept her face impassive. She had expected this, Victor's threats, his arrogance, but she was not backing down. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. I may be a small piece to you, Victor, Jasmine replied, her voice steady. But even the smallest piece can take down a giant. You've underestimated me. A flicker of irritation crossed Victor's face, but he quickly masked it. He stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving Jasmine's. You really think you can take me down? He asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. What are you going to do, Jasmine? Tell more people? Spread more rumors? That's not going to change anything. Jasmine took a deep breath, her mind racing as she weighed her options. She had no more cards to play, no more secrets to reveal. The only thing left was to stand her ground and let Victor know that he had no control over her anymore. I'm not going to waste my time with rumors, Jasmine said, her eyes narrowing. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. I'm going to expose you for the fraud you are. And once the truth is out, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Victor let out a low, humorless laugh, his eyes darkening. You really don't get it, do you? He said, taking a step closer to her. You can expose me all you want, Jasmine. But when you're dealing with people like me, there's always a price to pay. You think you're the first person to try and take me down? I've seen it all. And I've crushed everyone who's ever tried. You're no different. Jasmine stood her ground, her back straight, her eyes locked onto his. Maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm the one who will finally show people that you're not untouchable, that your power means nothing when people start speaking the truth. For a moment, Victor's gaze softened, and Jasmine could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold, calculating look he was known for. You're playing a dangerous game, he said quietly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And you'll lose. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She was ready. Maybe, she said, her voice calm and resolute. But I'm willing to take that risk. Victor's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Jasmine thought he might strike out at her, might try to intimidate her into submission. But instead, he turned away, walking to the window of his office, his back to her. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said after a long pause, his tone softer now, but still laced with menace. But don't think for a second that you're the one in control here. You've made your choice, Jasmine, and you'll pay for it. Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already made her choice, and she wasn't afraid of the consequences. She wasn't afraid of him. You'll regret this, Victor added, his voice low and final. I'll make sure of it. Jasmine felt a surge of defiance rise within her, but she kept her expression neutral, her posture relaxed. I don't think I will, she said softly. But we'll see, won't we? With that, she turned and walked toward the door. As she reached the handle, she paused and glanced back at Victor, who stood motionless by the window, staring out into the distance. I'm not afraid of you, Victor, Jasmine said, her voice carrying just enough for him to hear. And I won't let you win. She opened the door and stepped out, the weight of the moment settling heavily on her shoulders. As she walked down the hallway, the silence of the mansion seemed to follow her, pressing in from all sides. But Jasmine didn't feel the weight of it. She felt lighter than she had in years. She had taken a stand. She had spoken her truth. And no matter what Victor did, no matter how much he tried to make her feel small, Jasmine knew that she had already won. The real battle had only just begun, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with tension, the silence in the mansion growing more oppressive with each passing hour. Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was watching her, waiting for her to slip up. But she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. She had made her choice, and now she had to stick with it. The servants who had once ignored her now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Some of them avoided her gaze, while others seemed to whisper behind her back. Jasmine paid them no mind. She had bigger things to worry about. Late one night, as Jasmine sat in the small staff lounge, she overheard a conversation between two of the other servants. They were talking in hushed tones, but Jasmine could make out enough to understand that Victor was already taking steps to silence her. He had ordered his men to follow her, to watch her every move. He wanted to know everything she was doing, every person she was talking to. It was clear that he wouldn't stop until he had eliminated the threat she posed. Jasmine's stomach turned at the thought, but she refused to be intimidated. She had already come too far to back down now. The next day, as Jasmine was cleaning one of the guest rooms, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. Startled, she quickly wiped her hands on the towel before opening it. Standing in the doorway was one of Victor's associates, a man she had seen around the mansion but didn't know well. He looked at her with a cold, calculating gaze. Victor wants to see you, he said, his voice low and unwelcoming. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She knew that this was no ordinary meeting. She followed the man through the mansion's long corridors, her mind racing with questions. What did Victor want now? Was this another warning? Or was he finally ready to make good on his threats? When they arrived at Victor's office, the man stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Victor was seated behind his massive desk, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't look up when Jasmine entered, but she could feel his eyes on her, weighing her every move. "You wanted to see me?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite the nerves tightening in her chest. Victor didn't answer right away. He simply stared at her, as if waiting for her to speak first. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, he spoke. "You've been making a lot of noise lately," he said, his voice cold and distant. "And it's starting to attract attention. Do you think you're the only one who's had enough of me?" Jasmine stood her ground, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not trying to make noise, Victor," she replied. "I'm just trying to make sure the truth comes out. You've been hiding behind lies and power for too long. It's time for that to change." Victor's lips curled into a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You really think you can change anything?" he asked, his voice low and mocking. "You're just a maid, a nobody, and you're trying to stand up to me? You're playing a dangerous game, Jasmine. You're in way over your head." Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't let her fear show. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor," she said, her voice firm. "And I'm not going to back down. Not this time." The smile faded from Victor's face, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand what you're up against," he said. "You think you can just walk in here and expose me, but you're not dealing with some weak little man. You're dealing with someone who built an empire. You're dealing with someone who's not afraid to crush anyone who stands in his way. And right now, Jasmine, you're in my way." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to show any sign of fear. She had been afraid her entire life, afraid of being overlooked, of being insignificant. But not anymore. She wasn't going to let Victor intimidate her. "You don't scare me, Victor," she said, her voice steady. "You can threaten me all you want, but it won't change anything. People are going to know the truth. And when they do, it won't matter how much money or power you have. Your empire will crumble." Victor's expression darkened, his eyes flashing with anger. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You really think I'm going to let you walk away from this, Jasmine?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just waltz in here, defy me, and then leave? I'm done playing games with you. You're either going to fall in line, or you're going to regret it." Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her eyes unwavering. "I won't fall in line," she said quietly. "And I won't regret it." The silence in the room was deafening as Victor stared at her, his face twisted in frustration. For a moment, it seemed like he was about to lash out, to strike her down and end it all. But then, something changed. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, and he looked away, his gaze shifting toward the window. "You've got guts," he said finally, his voice quieter now, but still carrying a sense of menace. "I'll give you that. But this is far from over. You may think you've won, but I'll make sure you regret this. You'll never be able to hide from me." Jasmine stood in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that Victor wasn't finished with her, that this battle was far from over. But she also knew that she wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let him win. She was done being afraid. And whatever came next, she would face it head on. Jasmine walked out of Victor's office with her heart still racing, but there was a new sense of clarity in her steps. She had stood up to him, and though she knew he wouldn't let this go easily, she felt stronger than she had ever felt before. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the grand hallway as she made her way back to the staff quarters. The mansion, which had once felt like a suffocating prison, now seemed different to her. It was just a building, a place where people hid behind masks of power and wealth. But she wasn't hiding anymore. As she reached the hallway outside her room, Jasmine stopped for a moment, her mind racing. She could still feel Victor's cold gaze on her, and the words he had spoken replayed in her mind. He had promised that she would regret defying him, but Jasmine wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to let his threats control her anymore. She had to move quickly. She couldn't let him get the upper hand again. The first thing she needed was information. She needed to find out exactly what Victor was involved in. what he had been hiding for all these years. Jasmine had already overheard enough to know that there were dark secrets within the mansion, but she needed concrete proof. And she knew where to start. The mansion had a massive library, one that Victor rarely used, but Jasmine had cleaned it many times. She knew there were files hidden there, documents that could reveal the truth. As she opened the door to her small room, Jasmine grabbed a notebook and quickly wrote down a plan. She would go to the library at night, when most of the staff would be asleep, and she would search through the papers. No one could stop her now. She had made her choice, and she was determined to see it through. That evening, as the house grew quiet, Jasmine slipped out of her room. The hallways were dimly lit, the soft hum of the mansion's old air conditioning system the only sound in the stillness. She moved quickly, staying in the shadows, avoiding the few staff members still awake. She made her way to the library, the door creaking slightly as she opened it. Inside, the room was dark, the only light coming from a small desk lamp in the corner. Jasmine closed the door behind her and walked to the back of the room, where Victor's private desk stood. She knew that the documents she needed would be hidden in one of the drawers. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the first drawer. Inside, there were several folders, but none of them seemed to be what she was looking for. She moved on to the next one. There it was. A folder marked with the name Johnson family. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as she pulled it out. The Johnson family was one of the wealthiest in the city, and their connection to Victor had always been rumored, but she had never known the details. She opened the folder carefully, her fingers trembling as she scanned the contents. Inside were contracts, financial statements, and several photographs of meetings between Victor and members of the Johnson family. The documents outlined a deal involving land development, a massive project that Victor had been pushing for months. The project itself seemed harmless enough, but as Jasmine read further, she found references to illegal activities, shady business deals, and threats made against anyone who stood in the way of the project. Her stomach turned as she realized the full extent of what Victor was involved in. This wasn't just a real estate deal. It was part of something much darker, something that could ruin lives. Jasmine carefully placed the documents back into the folder and closed the drawer. She didn't have much time. She needed to leave before someone found her here. But as she turned to leave, the faint sound of footsteps outside the door made her freeze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she held her breath, hoping whoever it was would pass by. The footsteps stopped outside the library door. Jasmine's pulse quickened. She had been so careful, but now, she was in danger of being caught. She quickly moved toward the window, praying that she could escape unnoticed. But as she reached for the latch, the door to the library swung open. It was Frank. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Frank stood in the doorway, his posture relaxed, but Jasmine could see the hint of suspicion in his gaze. "What are you doing here?" Frank asked, his voice low. Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to calm the nervous energy that was surging through her. She couldn't let him know what she had been doing. I was just cleaning," she said, forcing a calm tone. "I thought I heard something." Frank studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Really?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Jasmine nodded, hoping he would buy her excuse. But Frank didn't move. He stepped into the room, his gaze scanning the space before resting on the desk where Jasmine had just been. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had left the folder open, just a little, and Frank's eyes immediately fell on it. "What's this?" he asked, walking over to the desk. Jasmine's mind raced. She couldn't let him see what was inside. "It's nothing," she said quickly, walking toward him. "Just a few papers I was cleaning up." Frank didn't answer right away. He picked up the folder and glanced inside. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as he flipped through the pages. But then, to her relief, he closed it and placed it back on the desk. "Be careful," Frank said, his tone softening slightly. "Victor doesn't like people snooping around. You're not supposed to be here at this hour." Jasmine nodded, trying to hide the relief that was flooding through her. "I'm sorry. I'll leave right away." Frank gave her a hard look before turning and walking toward the door. "Make sure you don't let Victor catch you doing something you're not supposed to," he said, his voice low. "He won't be as lenient as I am." Jasmine watched him leave, her mind spinning. She had narrowly escaped, but she knew this was only the beginning. Victor would stop at nothing to protect his secrets, and she had just uncovered something that could bring him down. The next few days were filled with a sense of urgency. Jasmine couldn't afford to waste any time. She had narrowly escaped suspicion the night before, but she knew that Victor's eyes were still on her. She couldn't trust anyone in the mansion now. Frank's warning about Victor's intolerance for disobedience lingered in her mind. She had to act fast and be smarter than ever. Each step she took could be a misstep, and she couldn't afford to slip up. Jasmine spent the following evening preparing for her next move. The papers she had found in the library were crucial, but she needed more information to piece everything together. She knew the key to taking down Victor lay in exposing the full extent of his dealings with the Johnson family and the other shady figures he had been working with. But getting that information wouldn't be easy. The mansion's security was tight, and Victor's men were everywhere. She had to find a way to outsmart them. That night, after the staff had finished their work, Jasmine made her way to the main office, where Victor kept his most important documents. She knew that the office was off-limits after hours, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. She had to take risks if she wanted to bring him down. The hallway was dimly lit as Jasmine moved through it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as a couple of security guards walked past. She was almost invisible in the shadows. The office was just ahead, and her heart pounded in her chest. She reached the door quietly and slowly turned the handle. To her surprise, it was unlocked. Her mind raced with questions. Had someone forgotten to lock it? Or was this part of Victor's plan? She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The office was large and opulent, just like the rest of the mansion. But the richness of the decor couldn't hide the coldness that lingered in the air. Jasmine walked past the large desk and headed toward the file cabinets along the wall. She knew that the documents she needed were in there. The cabinets were locked, but she had seen the key to them earlier when she had cleaned the office. She moved quickly, searching through the drawers until she found the one that held the most important files. She unlocked it and opened it carefully, scanning the contents. Inside were contracts, payment records, and correspondence between Victor and various business partners. Jasmine's hands trembled as she sifted through the papers, her eyes widening as she discovered more damning evidence of Victor's illegal dealings. She knew that if she could expose this, it would be enough to destroy him. But just as she was about to gather the papers and leave, she heard footsteps in the hallway again. Jasmine froze, her heart racing as she shoved the papers back into the drawer and locked it. She turned to leave, but then she stopped. There, on the desk, was a file she hadn't seen before. It was labeled simply Project X. Her pulse quickened. This could be the key to everything. She walked over to the desk and picked up the file, flipping it open. Inside, she found plans for a large-scale operation, one that involved bribery, manipulation, and coercion. It was clear that Victor was planning something even bigger than she had imagined. As she read through the details, Jasmine's heart sank. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, about using people as pawns in a much larger game. She needed to get out of there and take the file with her, but just as she was about to leave, she heard a door slam shut. She stiffened, listening carefully. Someone was coming. Without thinking, she slipped behind the curtains, holding her breath as the sound of footsteps grew louder. The door to the office opened, and Jasmine held herself still, praying she wouldn't be noticed. She peered through a small crack in the curtains and saw Frank enter the room. He looked around, as if searching for something. Jasmine's stomach tightened. Had he seen her earlier? Was he here to check up on her? Frank walked over to the desk and stopped, looking at the file labeled Project X. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as he reached for it. She couldn't let him find her. She had to move, and fast. She slipped out from behind the curtains and crept toward the door, her movements as quiet as possible. But just as she was about to open it, she stepped on a loose floorboard. The sound echoed in the silence, and Frank's head snapped toward her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and filled with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had to think quickly. I was just checking something," she stammered, her mind racing for an excuse. Frank's eyes narrowed as he walked toward her. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Victor won't like this. You need to leave now." Jasmine didn't say anything. She simply nodded, knowing that the longer she stayed, the more danger she was in. But as she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that Frank knew more than he was letting on. Had he been following her all along? Had he figured out what she was trying to do? Jasmine walked quickly down the hallway, her mind racing. She had gotten what she came for, but now, she was more uncertain than ever. The stakes were higher than she had realized, and Victor's reach was far wider than she had thought. She had only just begun to uncover the truth, but now, it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Jasmine's heart raced as she walked through the mansion, the weight of the folder in her hands feeling heavier than it had just hours before. Frank's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time since she had started this fight, doubt crept into her thoughts. Had she made a mistake? Was she really in control, or had she just been playing into Victor's hands all along? She couldn't afford to think like that. She had come too far to back down now. She had uncovered something much bigger than she had realized, and she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. But the further she dug, the more dangerous the situation became. She knew that Victor would stop at nothing to protect his empire. He would lie, manipulate, and destroy anyone who got in his way. And now that she was in the middle of it, she had no choice but to keep going. She couldn't back out now, not when the truth was so close. As she approached her room, Jasmine stopped in front of the door and took a deep breath. The mansion seemed quieter tonight, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. She was about to push open the door when she heard a sound from the hallway. It was faint, but it was there, footsteps. Her pulse quickened as she stepped back, her mind racing. She couldn't be caught with the folder. Not now. She quickly hid it under her bed and stood still, holding her breath. The footsteps grew louder, and Jasmine's eyes darted to the door. She needed to act fast. The door to her room opened slowly, and in stepped Frank. His gaze swept the room, but he didn't immediately notice the tension in the air. He closed the door behind him quietly, his face unreadable. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Frank didn't answer right away. He stood there for a moment, just looking at her. Then, without warning, he stepped closer, his presence filling the small space. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jasmine," he said, his voice low but firm. "Victor doesn't take kindly to people poking around in his business." Jasmine swallowed hard but refused to show any fear. She had nothing to hide. "I'm not afraid of him," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not going to let him get away with it." Frank took another step toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Victor is not someone you want to cross. He's already noticed you, and he's not going to let you walk away. You're just a maid, Jasmine. A nobody." Jasmine stood tall, not letting his words affect her. "I may be a maid, but I'm not a nobody. And I'm not backing down." Frank didn't seem to like her response. He stepped back slightly, his expression hardening. "You think you're the first person to try and stand up to him?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "People have tried before, Jasmine. They all end up the same way." Jasmine's stomach tightened. "And how is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Frank's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the tension in the room was unbearable. "They disappear," he said coldly. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. The words were like a slap in the face. She knew that Victor's reach was wide, that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. But hearing it from Frank's lips made it all feel real. For a brief moment, Jasmine felt fear creep into her heart. She could feel the weight of the danger she was in, the risk she had taken. But then, just as quickly, that fear was replaced by something stronger. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down. "I'm not going to disappear," she said, her voice firm. "I'm going to take him down. I'm going to expose him for what he really is." Frank seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if he were considering her words. But then he shook his head, his expression turning cold again. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Victor doesn't lose. He never has. And he won't let you win." Jasmine held his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe this time he will." Frank didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked toward the door, pausing for a moment before he left. "I warned you," he said softly. "Don't say I didn't." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Jasmine was left alone in her room, her mind racing. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the danger. She had no idea what Victor would do next, but she couldn't afford to wait any longer. She had to act now, before it was too late. Jasmine stood up, walking over to the bed where she had hidden the folder. Her fingers brushed the paper inside, and she felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let Victor get away with what he had done. She wasn't going to let him destroy more lives. The game was on, and she was ready for whatever came next. Jasmine didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the documents, Victor's plans, the secrets he was trying to bury, the lives he had destroyed. She couldn't just sit back and hope things would change. She had already taken the first step, but now she had to make sure she finished what she started. The information she had was dangerous, not just to Victor, but to everyone around her. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became. She couldn't do this alone. Jasmine needed help. She couldn't trust the staff, and she couldn't trust anyone working for Victor. But there was one person who might be able to help her, someone who knew the inner workings of the mansion, someone who had been in the shadows just like she had. It had to be someone close to Victor, someone who could get access to the information she needed without raising suspicion. The idea came to her in the middle of the night. She needed to reach out to Marissa, the housekeeper, who worked in the East Wing. Marissa had been with the Romano family for years and had seen the good and the bad. She had always kept to herself, but Jasmine had overheard her talking to other staff members about the things she had seen. Jasmine wasn't sure if Marissa would be willing to help, but it was worth a shot. The next morning, Jasmine made her way to the East Wing, her steps silent on the marble floors. The house was still, too still. The usual hustle of staff moving through the halls was absent. Everyone was on edge, and Jasmine could feel it. She reached the East Wing and paused outside Marissa's room, her heart racing. She knocked softly, and after a few moments, the door creaked open. Marissa's tired eyes met hers, and for a second, Jasmine thought she might turn her away. But instead, Marissa stepped aside, allowing Jasmine to enter. "What is it?" Marissa asked in a hushed voice, closing the door behind her. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "I need your help," she said quietly. Marissa frowned, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to overhear. "You know I can't get involved in this. Victor, he'll kill me if he finds out." Jasmine's heart sank, but she didn't give up. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we both know what's happening here. We both know what Victor is capable of. He's been hiding things for years, and I need you to help me get the truth out." Marissa hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. She didn't say anything for a long moment, but then, slowly, she nodded. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I need to get into Victor's private files. I need access to his computer, his private records. I need everything he's been hiding. I need you to help me get it." Marissa looked at her warily. "You know how dangerous that is, right? If we're caught." "I know," Jasmine interrupted. "But we can't let him get away with this. People's lives are at stake. If we don't do something now, it's only going to get worse." Marissa nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help you," she said reluctantly. "But you have to promise me something. Once we have the information, we leave. No more playing this game. We get out of here, and we never look back." Jasmine met her eyes, nodding firmly. "I promise. We get the truth, and then we're done." Over the next few days, Jasmine and Marissa began to quietly plan their next move. Marissa had access to parts of the mansion that Jasmine didn't, and she knew where Victor kept his most important files. They had to be careful. The house was crawling with Victor's men, and one wrong move could end everything. But as the days passed, Jasmine felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Every time she stepped into the mansion's hallways, she felt eyes on her, watching her every move. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant footstep made her stomach tighten. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. The night finally arrived. Marissa had managed to slip away from the main staff and had come up with a plan to get them into Victor's office without arousing suspicion. Jasmine's heart raced as they made their way through the mansion, the large house dark and quiet. The plan was simple. Marissa would distract the night staff, while Jasmine slipped into Victor's office and copied the files they needed. They had to move fast. If anyone found them, there was no telling what Victor would do. Jasmine's hands trembled as she followed Marissa down the long hallway to Victor's office. The door loomed in front of her, as imposing as ever. The air was thick with tension. Jasmine could feel her pulse in her ears. "You ready?" Marissa whispered. Jasmine nodded, though she didn't feel ready at all. This was it. There was no turning back now. With one final glance around the hallway, Marissa opened the door to Victor's office. Jasmine stepped inside, and the door closed quietly behind her. The room was just as she remembered it. Dark wood furniture, expensive leather chairs, and the ever-present scent of cigars. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like the walls were closing in, like Victor's empire was crumbling before her eyes. She walked quickly to his desk and powered up the computer. Her hands were shaking as she navigated to the files. She had to find the right documents, the ones that would expose everything. As she clicked through the folders, she felt a strange sense of triumph mixed with fear. She was so close now, so close to ending it all. Just as she was about to open the final folder, she heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Jasmine froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been too slow. Someone was coming. Jasmine froze, her heart racing as the sound of footsteps grew louder. She glanced quickly at the computer screen, her fingers hovering over the mouse. The folder she was about to open could expose everything. All the secrets Victor had worked so hard to hide. But now, the risk had escalated. She needed to make a decision, fast. The footsteps were getting closer, and she couldn't afford to be caught now. She quickly clicked on the folder, dragging the files onto the desktop, but the screen flashed an error. She cursed under her breath. The computer was locked. Her eyes darted to the door as the footsteps stopped just outside. She had seconds, no more. Jasmine grabbed the USB drive from her pocket and plugged it into the computer, praying that this wouldn't alert anyone to her presence. She wasn't sure how much time she had, but she had to get the files out of here. The door handle began to turn, and Jasmine's pulse quickened. She moved as fast as she could, copying the most important documents onto the USB. Her hands were shaking, and her breath came in shallow gasps. She needed to hurry. With a final click, the files were transferred. She yanked the USB from the port, just as the door to Victor's office opened. She spun around, her heart in her throat. Frank stood in the doorway, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Frank's gaze flickered to the computer screen, and then to Jasmine, and for the briefest of moments, Jasmine thought she saw something. Sympathy, perhaps? Or was it just an illusion? "You shouldn't be here," Frank said, his voice low. Jasmine's mind raced. She couldn't let him stop her now. "I know what you're doing, Frank," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I know what Victor is doing, and I'm not going to let him get away with it." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just waltz in here and expose everything?" he asked, his voice cold. "You don't understand the game you're playing, Jasmine." Jasmine stood tall, the USB clutched tightly in her hand. "I don't care about your game," she said, her voice unwavering. "I care about the truth. I'm not letting him ruin more lives." Frank took a step forward, his expression hardening. "You're playing with fire," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Victor doesn't forgive people who betray him. You've already crossed the line, and now you're about to pay the price." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't let it show. She wasn't afraid of him. Not anymore. "I'm not afraid of Victor," she said quietly. "And I'm not afraid of you." Frank's gaze softened for just a moment, and for the first time, Jasmine saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You don't understand," he said again, his voice filled with frustration. "Victor will destroy you. You think you can walk away from this, but you won't. No one ever does." Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was, she had already made her choice. There was no turning back now. Frank stared at her for a long moment before he sighed. "You really don't get it, do you?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost resigned. "Victor doesn't lose. He'll find out what you've done, and when he does, he'll make you regret ever crossing him." Jasmine met his gaze, her heart pounding. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but I'm willing to take that risk." Frank's expression remained unreadable as he turned and walked to the door. He paused just before leaving and looked back at her. "You're making a big mistake," he said softly, before disappearing down the hallway. Jasmine stood there, the silence of the room pressing in on her. Her hands were still trembling, but she knew what she had to do. The USB drive in her hand felt like the key to everything. She had the evidence now. All she needed to do was get it to the right people. But that was easier said than done. Victor's reach was vast, and she had no doubt that he would stop at nothing to silence her. The question was, who could she trust? She couldn't go to the authorities, not yet. Not without more proof, more documentation. She needed someone who understood what she was up against, someone who could help her take Victor down without getting caught in the crossfire. As Jasmine made her way back to her room, her mind raced with possibilities. The mansion felt colder than usual, the walls closing in on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone knew what she had done. But she couldn't afford to be paranoid. She had a plan, and she had to follow through. She had to finish what she started. Jasmine knew that this was just the beginning. The information she had gathered was the key to bringing Victor down, but it was only a small piece of the puzzle. She needed to find more, to connect the dots and expose everything. And once the truth was out, there would be no turning back. But for now, she had the USB drive. And that was enough. For the first time since she had started this fight, Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone in this. She was taking control, and she wasn't going to let Victor win. Jasmine walked back to her room, her heart pounding as she held the USB drive tightly in her hand. The mansion, once a place of power and control, now felt like a maze, every corner holding the possibility of discovery. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, that at any moment, someone would figure out what she had done. But she couldn't let that fear control her. She had come too far. The folder she had seen on Victor's desk, the one marked Project X, was only the beginning. She needed more than just that. She needed to understand the full extent of Victor's operations, the lives he had destroyed, the people he had manipulated. But for now, she had this small, seemingly insignificant piece of evidence. And it was enough to bring him down. She had to find a way to get it into the right hands. But that meant making contact with someone who could protect her. Someone who could help her navigate the dangerous waters she was now swimming in. As she sat at her desk, staring at the USB drive, she thought about the people she could trust. Marissa was the first person who came to mind. She had helped Jasmine before, but could she really trust her with something this important? Could she trust anyone? The mansion was filled with secrets, and she had no idea who might be loyal to her, and who might be loyal to Victor. She needed to make a decision. She couldn't stay here forever, hiding in the shadows. If she wanted to stop Victor, she had to act. But how? As she pondered her options, a sudden knock on the door broke her concentration. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Who could that be? She had made sure to lock the door, and she hadn't expected anyone. Cautiously, she walked toward the door, peering through the peephole. It was Frank. Her pulse quickened. What did he want now? Hesitant but determined, Jasmine opened the door just a crack. What do you want? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Frank looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. I think we need to talk, he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was around. Jasmine frowned, not sure what to make of his sudden interest in her. What about? She asked, her tone cautious. Frank stepped closer, lowering his voice. It's not safe for you here anymore, he said, his eyes darkening. Victor knows what you've been up to. He's already made plans to deal with you, and they're not good. Jasmine's stomach sank. She had known this was coming, but hearing it from Frank's lips made it all too real. What are you talking about? She asked, trying to keep the panic from creeping into her voice. Victor is not someone you can play games with, Frank said, his voice filled with frustration. You've already crossed the line, and now you're going to pay for it. Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. She had already known that Victor wouldn't let this go, but hearing Frank confirm it made it all the more terrifying. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. Frank hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I can help you, he said, his voice softer now. I know how things work around here. I can get you out, but you have to trust me. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. She wasn't sure if she could trust Frank, but she didn't have a choice. She needed help. How can I trust you? She asked, her voice filled with suspicion. Frank sighed, his shoulders slumping. Because I'm trying to help you, Jasmine, he said quietly. Victor's not the only one with secrets. I've seen what he's done, and I'm not going to let him get away with it. Jasmine studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. He seemed genuine, but she couldn't let her guard down. And what do you want in return? She asked. Frank looked at her, his expression softening. I want to make sure that when this is over, you're safe. I don't want to see you get caught in the middle of all this. I'll help you get the evidence, but we have to act fast. Jasmine nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had no idea what Frank's game was, but she knew that he was right about one thing. She couldn't do this alone. She had to trust someone, and right now, he was her only option. All right, she said, her voice firm. I'll trust you. But we do this my way. Frank's eyes flickered with relief, and for the first time, he seemed to relax. Deal, he said, his tone almost relieved. We move quickly. Victor won't give us much time. Jasmine handed him the USB drive, feeling a sense of weightlessness as she did. This was it. She was finally taking control. Get this to the right people, she said. But be careful. Victor won't stop until we're both gone. Frank nodded, tucking the drive into his jacket pocket. Don't worry, he said. We'll make sure this ends, Jasmine. But we have to keep moving. As he turned to leave, Jasmine felt a surge of hope she hadn't felt in days. For the first time in a long time, she believed that she could win. She wasn't going to let Victor destroy everything. She was going to expose him, and she was going to make sure the world knew the truth. The days following her meeting with Frank passed in a blur. Jasmine's mind raced with the possibilities of what could happen next. The information was in Frank's hands now, but there was still so much to do. The danger was far from over. Every moment she spent in the mansion felt like she was walking on the edge of a cliff, waiting for someone to push her off. She couldn't relax. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The mansion, once a place of intimidation and power, now felt like a cage. Jasmine spent most of her time in her room, avoiding contact with the other staff members, staying out of the way, trying to remain invisible. But the silence in the mansion was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant voice made her heart race. She knew Victor was watching her, or at least, he was watching everything around her. The walls felt like they were closing in on her. Every time she stepped into the hallway, she half expected someone to grab her, to drag her away, and end this. But Jasmine couldn't think like that. She had made a decision, and she had to follow through. The stakes were too high now. She wasn't going to let fear stop her. She had to fight back. She had to make sure Victor didn't win. The thought of Victor's empire crumbling was all she needed to push her forward. She couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to uncovering everything. Jasmine had no illusions about what was at stake. She knew that Victor wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who got in his way. He had done it before. He would do it again. And she knew that if she failed, the consequences would be devastating. But Jasmine couldn't let that stop her. She had seen the truth, and now she had to make sure that everyone else did too. Her thoughts were interrupted when a knock sounded at her door. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Who could it be? She had barely interacted with anyone since that night with Frank. She had been keeping to herself, staying low, trying to avoid drawing attention. The knock came again, louder this time. Jasmine, a voice called from the other side. It was Marissa. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen Marissa since their conversation in the East Wing. Had something gone wrong? With a deep breath, Jasmine opened the door, trying to hide the nervousness she felt. Marissa stood there, her face tense but determined. We need to talk, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Jasmine stepped aside, letting Marissa into her room. What's going on? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marissa looked around once more before speaking, her voice shaking slightly. Victor knows. He knows what you've been up to, she said, her eyes wide with fear. Jasmine's stomach dropped. She had feared this moment. It was only a matter of time before Victor found out what she had been doing. What did he say? Jasmine asked, her voice tight. He hasn't said anything yet, Marissa replied. But I overheard him talking to Frank. He's planning something. I don't know what, but it's bad. He's not going to let you get away with this. Jasmine's mind raced. She had known the risks, but hearing it from Marissa made it all feel so real. What should we do? Jasmine asked, feeling the weight of the situation bearing down on her. We need to leave, Marissa said, her voice trembling. It's too dangerous here. You're not safe, Jasmine. Victor will come for you. Jasmine's thoughts spun as she considered Marissa's words. She had worked so hard to get this far, and now, everything was at risk. But Marissa was right. She wasn't safe here anymore. If she stayed, it wouldn't be long before Victor caught up with her. She had to get out. But where would she go? How could she protect herself when Victor's reach was everywhere? I can't just run, Jasmine said, shaking her head. I have to finish what I started. I can't let him get away with this. Marissa's eyes filled with worry. Jasmine, listen to me. You've already done so much. You can't fight him alone. You need to get out of here while you still can. Jasmine hesitated, her thoughts conflicting. She had spent so long trying to take down Victor, to expose him for the man he really was. She couldn't just walk away now, not when she was so close. But Marissa was right. It was too dangerous. Jasmine couldn't risk losing everything for the sake of a few more pieces of evidence. What do you want me to do? Jasmine asked, her voice shaking. Leave with me, Marissa urged, her voice pleading. We'll go somewhere safe. We'll figure it out. But you can't stay here. It's not safe. Jasmine closed her eyes, her mind swirling with thoughts. She had already made so many sacrifices, but was it worth it? Could she really trust Marissa? Could she trust anyone? The doubt was suffocating. But one thing was certain. She couldn't let Victor win. She couldn't let him destroy her. She had already come too far. All right, Jasmine said, her voice steady now. I'll go. But we're not done. We'll find a way to make him pay for what he's done. Marissa smiled, relief flooding her face. We will, she said. I promise. With one final look around the room, Jasmine grabbed her bag and followed Marissa out the door. As they walked down the hall, Jasmine felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like she had a chance. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would find a way to bring Victor down.